Cass, stop! What are you doing?
And I know who she is. Garrett, let her go.
That is my son.
Yes, and you already made your choice.
The phone rang. It went to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She set the phone face down on the bedside table. Then she picked it up again. She unlocked the screen. She read the last message he had sent. Dinner running long. Heading thereafter, she checked the timestamp. 5 hours and 43 minutes ago, she locked the screen. She set it down. She picked it up again. This was not rational. She knew it was not rational. A man did not answer his phone faster because you called it more times. But her hands would not stay still, and the phone was the only thing in the room she could actually do something about. So she kept picking it up and putting it down and picking it up again. Her name was Cassandra Whitmore Harlow. She was 33 years old. She was 38 weeks pregnant, and she was lying in a hospital bed in Mercy General Hospital in Manhattan in active labor, and the father of her child was not here. The room smelled of antiseptic and something floral. Someone had tried to make it feel less clinical. The effort was kind. The room still smelled like a hospital. The fluorescent light above her made a sound, a very specific low continuous hum. She had been in this room for 9 hours, and she had learned the exact frequency of that hum the way you learn anything you cannot escape. You stop fighting it. You make it part of your body. Another contraction. She breathed through it, long and low, the way the breathing instructor had shown her. In through the nose, out through the mouth. She had gone to those classes alone. Garrett had been in London for the 3rd session and traveling for 2 of the others. She had asked Paige to come once, and Paige had come and had held her hand through the practice contractions with such ferocity that the instructor had paused to watch them. Beverly Crane appeared in the doorway. Beverly was 58 years old and had been a labor and delivery nurse at Mercy General for 22 years. She had the kind of calm that came from having seen everything twice. She moved through a room like she owned it, which was the correct way to move through a room when the people in it were frightened. "How are we doing?" Beverly said. It was not really a question. She was checking the monitor, checking the IV line, checking Cassandra. All 3 things in 4 seconds. "Fine," Cassandra said. She said it automatically, the way she had said it for 8 years. Automatic. Correct. Covering everything underneath. Beverly looked at the phone on the bedside table. Just once. Very briefly. Then she looked at Cassandra. Then she pulled her stool a few inches closer to the bed. She did not take Cassandra's hand yet. She was waiting to be invited. 22 years had taught her when to wait. "His dinner must be running long," Cassandra said. "They do that sometimes," Beverly said. She said it without emphasis. She did not agree or disagree. She simply acknowledged that dinner could run long. This was technically true. Another contraction. This one sharper, more serious. The monitor beside her spiked and settled. Cassandra gripped the bed rail and breathed through it, and when it passed, she exhaled and stared at the ceiling and thought about nothing for a moment. Just the relief of the contraction ending. Just the 30 seconds of ordinary before the next one. She unlocked her phone again. She had sent him 4 texts. She had called twice. She had called the front desk of the St. Regis, where the investor dinner was being held. The woman at the front desk had a smooth, practiced voice. She said she was unable to confirm the whereabouts of guests. Cassandra said, "My name is Cassandra Harlow. My husband is Garrett Harlow. I am in active labor at Mercy General right now. Please find him and tell him." The smooth voice said she would pass the message along. That was 4 hours ago. She locked the screen. She put the phone down. She thought about the nursery, the lavender walls. Garrett had chosen that color. He had strong opinions about very specific things and almost no opinions about the daily texture of their life together, and lavender for the nursery was one of his strong opinion things. She had found it endearing then. She had agreed easily. She was always agreeing easily in those first years. The nursery was ready. Everything was ready. She had packed her hospital bags 6 weeks early because she was the kind of person who packed things early, who thought ahead, who made lists and checked them, and felt reassured by the process of preparation. Garrett called her his architect. Not the building kind, the life kind. She organized things. She made them beautiful. She made them work. She had organized everything about this birth, except the one thing she could not organize. Beverly moved her stool another inch closer. She said, "Is there someone I can call? A mother? A friend?" Cassandra said, "He will be here." Beverly nodded. She did not say anything. 22 years had also taught her when not to say anything. The clock on the wall said 9:47. Outside the window, Manhattan was doing what it always did. Moving, glittering, indifferent. $3.2 billion worth of a man's name was somewhere in that glitter. She could not see which light was his. She had never been able to tell, in all the years she had lived inside his world, which part of it was actually hers. Another contraction. Longer this time. Beverly counted with her. 1 and 2 and 3. Keep breathing. That is exactly right. Keep going. She kept going. The baby kept coming. She thought about the IVF appointments. 3 rounds across 4 years. She had managed all of it. The calendar, the medications, the clinical instructions. She had been the one who called the clinic when results came back. She had been the one who cried in the car after the first 2 failures, alone, because Garrett had a conference call and she had told him to go. She was fine. Go ahead. She was always fine. She was very good at being fine. She thought, I have been fine for a long time now. I wonder what I actually am. The contraction ended. At 11:17, Beverly said it was time. The room changed. A doctor appeared. A second nurse. Everything became purposeful and specific, and there was no more room for thinking about anything except what her body was doing and what Beverly was telling her to do. Beverly held her hand. She had not asked. She just took it. Cassandra held on. At 11:47, James Whitmore Harlow took his first breath. He announced himself loudly. Beverly said, there he is. Look at him. Look at what you did. Cassandra looked at him. Nothing in her life had prepared her for this. Not the books. Not the other women's stories. Not the long months of hoping and losing and trying again. She had thought she understood what it would feel like. She had not understood at all. He was here. He was real. He was hers. The phone on the bedside table did not ring. She did not look at it. Beverly wrapped James and placed him on Cassandra's chest. He was warm in a way that was different from everything else in the room. He was the kind of warm that came from inside, from being alive, from being new to it. He curled his fingers around her index finger. He did not know yet. He did not know the world. He did not know the ceiling or the light or the hum of the fluorescent bulb. He did not know his father was not here. He knew this voice, this heartbeat, this warmth. He had been listening to this voice for 8 months, and he knew it completely. She was the only thing in the world he was certain of. She held him. The doctor moved efficiently. Beverly moved quietly. The second nurse recorded things, wrote things, handled the room's necessary business. Cassandra was aware of all of it the way you are aware of weather. Peripheral. Real. Not important right now. James was important right now. James was the only important thing. Beverly said, very quietly, you did this, right? Look at what you did. Yes, Cassandra said. Her voice surprised her. It was entirely steady. She had not known if it would be. She had been in this room for 11 hours and made 4 unanswered phone calls and breathed through 43 contractions, and she had thought at some point she might break open. She did not break open. She was steadier right now than she had been in years. The baby smelled like something she had no word for. New, specific. The most real thing she had ever pressed her face close to. She breathed it in. Outside the window, Manhattan glittered. Somewhere in that glitter, a man in a charcoal suit was doing something that was not this. She did not look at the window. She looked at her son. A long time later, after the room had quieted, after the second nurse had gone, after the doctor had come back and gone again, Beverly came to sit beside her. You should try to sleep, Beverly said. I know, Cassandra said. He is healthy. He is perfect. You can rest. I know, she said again. Beverly was quiet for a moment. Then she said, is there someone you want me to call? It is not too late to call someone. Cassandra thought about her mother. Diane Whitmore, 61 years old, retired school teacher in a farmhouse in Vermont. 4 hours away. She had been waiting for this call since 6 o'clock this morning. She had called twice during the labor. Cassandra had sent a text at 3 in the afternoon. In labor, we'll call when I can. We are okay. She had not called since. She said, my mother? Beverly nodded. She handed her the phone. She said, I will give you some privacy, and stepped out of the room. Cassandra dialed. Her mother answered on the first ring. Baby, Diane said. Just that word. The way she said it carried everything she had been holding all day. He is here, Cassandra said. James is here. He is perfect. She heard her mother exhale, a long, shaking exhale. The kind that had been waiting for hours. Is he? He is perfect, Mama. He is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. A pause. The sound of her mother trying not to cry and not succeeding. And are you? I am okay, Cassandra said. Another pause. Her mother was listening to something in her voice. Her mother had always been very good at listening to what was underneath the words. Where is Garrett? Diane said. Carefully, like she was setting something fragile on a table. Cassandra looked at the phone on the bedside table. The screen was dark. He is on his way, she said. Her mother did not say anything for a long moment. Okay, Diane said. Just okay. She let it sit there. I will send pictures, Cassandra said. As soon as I can. I will be waiting, Diane said. I love you, both of you. I know, Cassandra said. I love you too. She hung up. She held James. The fluorescent light hummed. The city moved outside the window. Everything that was going to happen was already decided, though she did not know it yet. She only knew one thing with certainty. She was not going to explain this away. Not this time. Not this one. The night passed slowly. Then hospital nights are like that. The hours between 1 and 4 feel eternal. The hours after 4 rush toward morning like they have somewhere important to be. Cassandra drifted in and out of something that was not quite sleep. She was aware of James in the bassinet beside her. The small sounds he made. The way he shifted. She counted each breath. Around 4 in the morning, her phone lit up. Not a call. A text. Had to handle something. Be there in the morning. So proud of you. She read it. She read it again. Had to handle something. She thought about what that sentence contained. All the space inside it. All the things it did not say. She put the phone face down. She looked at the ceiling. She thought, handle something. At 11:47 at night, when your son was being born, you were handling something. She did not pick the phone up again. By 7 in the morning, James was awake and hungry, and Cassandra was sitting up in the hospital bed holding him, which felt natural already, which felt like she had always done this, which was both wonderful and terrifying. Her mother called on video. Diane Whitmore appeared on the screen looking like a woman who had not slept and who did not care that she had not slept. Let me see him, Diane said. Cassandra tilted the phone. James chose this moment to make the face he made when he was considering whether to cry. His whole features gathered toward the center. Diane made a sound. Oh, she said, oh, baby. Oh, she was talking to James. She was also possibly talking to Cassandra. She was possibly talking to the general idea of this moment. He is 8 pounds and 2 ounces, Cassandra said. He has Garrett's forehead. She said his name automatically. It sat in her mouth strangely. Diane said, he has your eyes already. You cannot really tell yet, Cassandra said. I can tell, Diane said, in the tone of a woman who had been right about eyes before. They talked for 15 minutes. About James. About the birth. Cassandra described Beverly and the labor, and the way James had announced himself with such certainty, and Diane laughed and cried at the same time in the way of people whose hearts are entirely too full. Near the end, carefully, Diane said, and Garrett. Coming this morning, Cassandra said. He had a late work thing. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Okay, Diane said. Paige called at 8:15. Every detail, she said before Cassandra could speak. Do not leave out 1 millimeter of that baby's face. Start at the top of his head and work down. Cassandra described him. Paige said, oh my God, 12 times. She meant every single one. Then Paige said, in a different voice, and where the hell on his way, Cassandra said. Silence.
Okay, Paige said.
It had the exact sound of a woman who had been biting a long, suffering tongue for years and had just bitten it again. Okay, I love you. Call me the second you need anything. I know, Cassandra said, I will. Garrett arrived at 1:17 in the afternoon. 26 hours and 30 minutes after his son was born. He walked in looking rested. That was the first thing she noticed. He was in a fresh suit, not the same clothes from the night before. A fresh suit, fresh shirt, his hair styled the way it was when he had time to style it. He smelled of his cologne. His own cologne, which was familiar and expensive, and which she had bought him for 3 Christmases in a row because he liked it, and because she liked the ritual of choosing it. Underneath his cologne, very faint, something else, a woman's perfume. Not hers. She knew that perfume. She had noticed it before. She had filed it away the way she filed things she was not ready to look at. There was a drawer inside herself where those things lived. It was getting very full. Garrett came to her first. He kissed her forehead. You did it, he said. I am so proud of you. You were incredible. She did not say anything. He went to the bassinet. He looked at James for a moment. Then he reached down and picked him up. He held his son. She counted. She did not plan to count. Her mind did it automatically. The way it did when she was most afraid, when fear made everything in her go quiet and precise and specific. 40 seconds. Garrett held his son for 40 seconds. He looked at James with an expression that was appropriate. That was the exact word for it. Appropriate. He said, he is perfect. He said it like a line he had prepared. Not because it was not true. It was true, but he said it like something he had readied. His phone buzzed in his breast pocket. She heard it from the bed. He glanced at it. A quick automatic look. The kind you make when a phone buzzes near your body. Then he said, I have to take this, 1 minute. He put James back in the bassinet. He stepped into the hallway. She looked at the partially open door. She could hear his voice. Low, reassuring. The voice he used with people whose opinion of him mattered. She heard him say, yes, I know. She heard him say, "I will handle it." She heard him say something that ended with a soft laugh. A private laugh, the kind you make when you are at ease, when you are where you want to be. Beside the bassinet, Beverly was resetting something on the monitor. She did not look at the hallway. She looked at Cassandra. Her expression said nothing and everything. 22 years of watching this floor had given her that expression. She had seen this before. Not this specific man, this specific category of man. She had seen him leave rooms before. Garrett came back in 12 minutes, not one. He said sorry, overseas call. Could not be avoided. He sat on the edge of the chair beside her bed. He asked how the birth went. She described it. He nodded. He had the expression of a man processing a report. She watched him process it. She thought, I called you 4 times. I texted you 3 times. I asked the hotel to find you. And you are sitting here nodding like I have described a business trip. You are asking about outcomes, not experience. You want to know that the project was completed successfully. That is what this is to you. A project. His phone buzzed again. He glanced at it. He slid it back into his pocket without answering. But in that half second, she saw the screen. She was not trying to see it. She was simply looking in that direction when it lit up. The name was Serena. The drawer inside her opened, all of it at once. Everything she had ever put in there. The late nights he had explained. The unfamiliar perfume she had explained. The way his voice changed sometimes on phone calls when she came into the room. The dinner last spring that ran until 2 in the morning for reasons he described quickly and moved past. The time she had seen Serena Voss at a company event and Garrett had introduced her in a voice that was 1 degree too casual. The drawer opened completely and everything in it came out at once. 8 years of small, filed-away moments, all of them landing simultaneously. She did not cry. She was too clear for crying. She felt it the way you feel something in your chest when the air goes out of a room. A shift in pressure, a recognition. This had been happening for a long time. She had known. On some level. She had known the way you know a word before you say it out loud. She said, very calmly, you should go. He looked up. What? You look tired, and you have things to handle. She kept her voice even. Precise. You should go. He heard something in her voice. He had known her long enough to hear when something was different. Cass, James and I are going to sleep, she said. You should go. He stood. He smoothed his jacket. The automatic gesture of a man who was always aware of how he appeared. He said, I will be back tonight. She said, okay. He kissed her forehead again. He looked at James once more in the bassinet, then he walked out. She listened to his footsteps. They were even. Unhurried, they faded down the hallway, past the nurse's station, past the elevator, gone. Beverly did not say anything for a long time. Then she said quietly, is there someone close to you? Not distant. Close. My mother, Cassandra said. In Vermont, Beverly nodded slowly. She reached into the pocket of her scrubs. She held out a small card. She helped my sister, Beverly said, 9 years ago, in a situation that had a very similar shape to yours. Cassandra looked at the card. A name. A phone number. Ruth Calloway. She looked up at Beverly. Beverly said, I should not say anything else, but I want you to know that you are going to be okay. She paused. Not today. Today is hard. But eventually, you are going to be okay. Cassandra held the card. She looked at her son. James was asleep. His face was entirely at peace. The face of someone who had never been disappointed, who had never had anything to file away. She was going to do everything in her power to give him more time before that changed. The room grew quiet. The evening shift came on. A new nurse introduced herself and checked things and went away again. The city outside the window turned from gray to dark to lit. James slept. Cassandra held the Ruth Calloway card. She set it on the bedside table. She looked at it for a long time. She did not pick up her phone. She did not turn on the television. She just sat in the dim room with her son breathing beside her, and the card on the table and the hum of the fluorescent light and the sounds of the hospital moving around her like a slow river. Somewhere a baby cried. Somewhere a door closed. Somewhere an elevator chimed. She breathed. She let the room be what it was. She let the night be what it was. She did not reach for anything to make it better. She just sat with it. That was enough. She did not make the decision dramatically. That was the thing about decisions that changed everything. They arrived quietly. They arrived with their minds already made up. She made the list at 4 in the afternoon, the day after the birth. While James slept and the hospital moved around her, and her phone showed 2 missed calls from Garrett and one from a number she'd not recognize. She opened the notes app. She typed James's discharge paperwork. Her name only. Garrett had not been present at intake. She had handled it alone as she handled most things. The discharge authority was hers. Her mother's address, Diane Whitmore, the farmhouse in Williston, Vermont. 4 hours north by car. She knew the route. She had driven it alone on 3 different holidays when Garrett had been busy and told her to go ahead without him. Her car, registered in her name. Her insurance, her gray SUV, that she had chosen herself, practically and deliberately, without asking anyone's opinion. Garrett drove through the Harlow Global corporate fleet. Every vehicle in his life belonged to the company. Hers did not. Her personal savings account, $41,000 and some change. 8 years of quiet interest accumulation. The account she had opened the week she left her architectural firm. She had not touched it in 8 years. She had thought of it as a mistake fund, a place to put money in case she needed to undo something. She had been more prescient than she knew. Her hard drives. She had been an engaged and present spouse for 8 years. She attended board dinners and shareholder retreats and strategy events. She listened. She remembered. She had excellent recall for detail because detail was her professional training. And over 8 years of being in rooms where important things happened, her email address had received documents that she had never deleted. She had no agenda in keeping them. She simply never cleared her inbox. It was a habit, an organizational preference. She was beginning to understand what it actually was. It was a record. She opened her email. She found the thread. 8 years of Harlow Global Communications passed through her account. Board meeting minutes, financial disclosures, strategic planning documents, 2 email chains involving Secondary LLC. Registered in Delaware that she had asked about once lightly at a dinner. And Garrett had explained away in 3 sentences, and she had let him. She forwarded everything to a personal account she had created 3 months ago, in the middle of the 3rd trimester. When something had begun shifting in how she understood her situation, she had not named the shift then. She had just created the account. She deleted the sent folder from her primary email. She called her mother at 6:30. "Mama," she said. Diane heard everything in that one syllable. "Tell me what you need," she said. "I need to come home." A pause. Not of hesitation, of calculation. Diane working through the farmhouse, the rooms, what a newborn needed, what her daughter needed. "When?" she said. "Tomorrow, after discharge." "Okay, no questions, no conditions. I will have the back bedroom ready. I will get a bassinet. Come home." Cassandra said, "Do not tell anyone yet, not even Dad." Diane said, "Understood." She called Paige at 7. "I need you to listen," Cassandra said, without asking me anything yet. "Okay," Paige said. "I am going somewhere safe with James." Silence. The very particular silence of a woman who had been waiting years for something and was now hearing the beginning of it. "Tell me what you need," Paige said. The same sentence her mother used. The 2 people who loved her best said the same thing in the same way. It did not require anything from her. It just opened. "Nothing yet," Cassandra said. "Just be close." "I am right here," Paige said. "I am not going anywhere." The next morning at 9:14, Beverly processed her discharge papers. Cassandra signed everything. She dressed James in the pale blue onesie with white stars that Paige had given her at the shower. She buckled his car seat with careful precision. She had practiced on a borrowed car seat for 3 months. The buckle clicked. He was secure. Beverly walked her to the elevator. Protocol. At the elevator doors, Beverly paused. She said, "You know where you are going?" "Yes," Cassandra said. Beverly looked at her for a long moment. "You are going to be okay," she said. "I want you to know that. From someone who has stood in a lot of rooms with a lot of women, you are going to be okay." The elevator doors opened. Cassandra stepped inside. She was holding her son. She had the bag with his things. She had the card with Ruth Calloway's name. She had the drives with everything she had kept. The doors closed. In the parking garage, she sat in the car for 11 minutes before she turned the key. James was in his car seat in the back. The garage smelled of concrete and exhaust. Something dripped somewhere in the structure. Slow. Steady. She checked the mirrors. She checked her phone. One missed call from Garrett. Time-stamped 42 minutes ago. She did not call back. She looked at the ramp leading up to the street. She took a breath. She turned the key. She did not go back to the apartment. She had packed her hospital bag, knowing she might not. She drove through the streets of Manhattan without stopping, without second-guessing, without allowing herself to look at the building they had lived in for 6 years. She got on the highway north. In the back seat, James slept. She drove 4 hours. When she turned onto her mother's road, the late afternoon light was low and golden and specific, the kind of light that only happens in Vermont in November. She had forgotten how different light could be when you were not inside glass and steel. Her mother was on the porch before the car stopped. Diane Whitmore came down the steps in her yard shoes, moving faster than Cassandra had seen her move in years. She opened the back door. She looked at James for the first time in his car seat. She put her hands over her mouth. She stood there for a long moment. Then she carefully unbuckled him. She lifted him. She held him against her chest with the practiced certainty of a woman who had held many babies and who knew exactly how to make a new one feel that everything was going to be all right. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Come inside. It is cold." Cassandra followed her mother inside. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table she had eaten breakfast at every morning for the first 18 years of her life. The same crack in the second plank from the left where she had dropped a cast iron pan when she was 12. The same smell of her mother's house. Wood smoke and something baked and a particular scent that she had never been able to name because it was just the smell of this specific place, which was safety. Her mother put the kettle on with one hand and held James with the other. The kettle made its particular clicking sound as the burner caught. The pipes made their groaning sound as the heat came on. The farmhouse settled around her like something that had been waiting. She was home. For the first time in 8 years, she was somewhere that was entirely real. She did not say anything. Neither did her mother. The kettle began to hiss. The first week was just survival. His survival. Hers. They were not so different. James woke every 2 hours, sometimes less. She fed him. Changed him. Held him through the early morning hours when everything was dark and quiet, and the farmhouse made its nighttime sounds and the world outside was still and cold. She learned his rhythms. He learned hers. They were in the first weeks of a conversation that would last her entire life, and she was paying close attention to every word. Diane moved through the house like water, appearing and disappearing. A glass of water on the nightstand, a bowl of soup that materialized beside her while she was feeding James and that she ate one-handed without noticing until it was gone. Diane did not comment on any of it. She did not ask questions. She simply made sure her daughter was eating and drinking and not sitting alone too long in dark rooms. Cassandra's phone stayed on. She had not broken any law. James was her son. The discharge papers confirmed it. She had driven to her mother's house, which was a real place with a real address, and she was reachable by anyone who needed to reach her. She was not hiding. She was simply not where Garrett expected her to be. His calls started on the second day. 4 calls the first evening. She watched each one come in and go to voicemail. She listened to the first message. His voice was controlled, concerned. The public voice he used on camera. He said he was worried. He said he wanted her to call him back. He said he just wanted to know they were safe. He said her name at the end of the message, cast quietly, in a different voice. The private voice. The one she had believed in for a very long time. She did not call back. After the 4th call, she blocked his personal number. She kept Paige. She kept her mother. She kept Eleanor Harlow's number because Eleanor had not called, which was itself a form of communication. The snow started on the 4th day. Vermont in November was not romantic about itself. It was not the snow of greeting cards. It was practical and gray and continuous, and it meant business. She watched it from the window of the back bedroom while James slept. She had not watched snow in years. In the city, snow was an inconvenience, something to navigate around. Here it was just weather, just the world doing what it did. She had forgotten how much she missed watching weather. The memories came when James was asleep and the house was quiet. She did not call them. They arrived anyway. The first apartment. Before the penthouse. Before Harlow Global's expansion and the move to the larger life. A small place in the West Village that she had made beautiful on a medium budget because she was good at that, because she understood what a space could be, and she found the beauty inside its actual proportions rather than inventing beauty from money. Garrett had loved that apartment. He had loved her in that apartment. She believed that was genuine. She believed that version of him was real. She thought about their wedding, the small ceremony they had both wanted. Not small because they could not afford large. Even then Garrett had money, the first serious money, the money of a man who was becoming something. Small because they agreed that the ceremony itself was the point, and the party was the part you did for other people. She had worn a dress she designed herself. She had chosen every detail. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever created. She had believed completely in the morning of that day. She had not been wrong to believe. That was the hardest part. It had been real. For a while. And then it became something else gradually, the way things change when you are not looking at them directly. She thought about Serena Voss. She thought about her carefully, deliberately, without the simplicity of rage. Serena Voss was 28. She had an MBA from Wharton. She was genuinely intelligent. You could see it in the way she spoke at the events Cassandra had attended. Sharp, quick, ambitious in the way that came from actual capability rather than from performance of it. Cassandra did not hate her. She had tried. Hating her would be simpler. But she kept arriving at the same place. Serena had been told a story. Garrett was very good at stories. He had told Cassandra a story for 8 years, and she had believed most of it. Why would Serena, who did not know the specific way his voice changed when he was lying, who did not have 8 years of learning the exact texture of his deflections, why would she be less deceived? She was not excusing her. She was just being accurate. Accuracy was how she would survive this. She checked her phone. She checked it the way she had checked it in the hospital. 3 times. Lock, unlock, read nothing new. Lock again, put it down, pick it up. The phone had become a habit she had not chosen, a way of reaching for something she could not name. She put it face down and left it face down. Her father called on day 6, Frank Whitmore, a man who could not keep a secret from his weekly poker group for more than 11 minutes. Diane had told him in the careful way she told Frank things she needed him to know but not spread. He called on a Tuesday morning. His voice was the voice of a man with large feelings and a limited vocabulary for them. "Your mother told me," he said, "not the details. Just that you are there and the baby is healthy." He cleared his throat. "Cass, you know I am not a man who gets in women's business." He said this every time he was about to get in women's business. She had known this her whole life. She found it comfortable, predictable. His predictability was one of the most reliable things she had ever known. "I know, Daddy," she said. That man, he stopped. "You just tell me what you need. Okay?" "I know," she said. "Okay, a pause. The baby. He is perfect." Another pause. The kind her father used when he was feeling more than he had words for. He was quiet long enough that she knew he was blinking something away. "Well," he said finally. "Well, of course he is." Diane made lasagna on day 8, her grandmother's recipe. The one on the card in her grandmother's handwriting that had lived in the same battered tin box in the same kitchen cabinet her entire life. The ink was faded. The card had a small brown stain on the bottom left corner from some long Ago kitchen incident. Diane made it the same way she always made it, which was the way her mother had always made it, which meant it tasted like continuity, like the particular comfort of things that did not change. Cassandra sat at the kitchen table and ate 2 full servings and did not talk because she was crying. Not dramatically, steadily. The way snow fell outside, continuous and practical and serious. Diane did not say anything. She served a 3rd serving. She sat across from her daughter. She let her cry. Eventually, Cassandra said, "I stayed quiet for so long." Diane said, I knew," Cassandra said. "Some part of me knew and I kept explaining it away." "I know that too," Diane said. "Does that make me—" "No," Diane said, before the sentence could finish itself. Her voice was very firm. "You stayed because you believed in something, because you had built a life, because leaving is not a small thing. You were not wrong to try." She paused. "You are not wrong now either," Cassandra nodded. She looked at her plate. She thought, "I do not know who I am without that life. I have been Garrett Harlow's wife for so long that I have forgotten who I was before that sentence. I was an architect. I ran a firm. I designed rooms that other people lived inside. I knew how to make a space work. I knew how to see what a thing actually was." She had stopped doing that at some point. She had stopped applying her professional instinct to her own life. She had been walking through the rooms of her marriage, looking at the decorative elements and not examining the structure. She knew how to examine structure. At midnight, she reorganized her mother's kitchen drawers. She took everything out of each drawer, all 8 of them. She wiped down the drawer bottoms with a damp cloth. She dried them. She put everything back in more logical groupings, the utensils that belonged together, the tools that made sense beside each other. She did not know why she was doing this. She had always done this. It was her specific and unexplainable response to feeling overwhelmed. She organized whatever was in front of her. She put things in their correct places. It never made her feel better about the actual problem, but it made her feel like she had control over something, even if the something was a drawer. She finished at 1:15 in the morning. She went to the window. The snow outside was still falling. James was asleep in the bassinet behind her. She could hear his breathing from across the room. She had already learned to hear it through walls. She was going to be okay, not today, not yet, but eventually. Beverly had said so. Her mother had said so. She was beginning, very slowly, to believe it herself. She went to the pine trees at the end of the road. She had not planned to. She just put on her coat and her boots and walked. The snow had stopped and the sky had cleared, and it was the kind of cold that was sharp and specific and asked something of you. The pines at the end of the road had been there her whole life. She stood under them. She breathed. The air smelled of pine and cold and the particular sharpness of a clear Vermont night. She did not think anything. She was not trying to process or plan or understand. She just stood under the trees that had always been at the end of this road and let them be what they were and let herself be what she was, which right now was a woman standing in the cold at midnight who was not yet sure what came next, but who was still standing. She stood there for 20 minutes. Then she walked back to the house. Garrett Harlow held a press conference on day 14. Cassandra watched it on her mother's kitchen television, the one they had bought in 2004. The picture was slightly soft at the edges. She was standing at the counter eating cereal because cereal required the least effort and she had not had time for anything else, and standing to eat meant she might finish before James woke up. Garrett appeared on the screen. He was wearing the charcoal suit. She had thought about that suit a great deal in the last 2 weeks. It was a very good suit. He had 3 of them in rotation. He wore them to things that mattered: board presentations, major investor dinners, the media interviews he did twice a year when Harlow Global had something to announce. He was wearing it now. For this, he stood at a lectern with the Harlow Global logo visible behind him. He had chosen this backdrop deliberately. This was a personal statement and a corporate statement simultaneously. He was protecting both things at once because in Garrett Harlow's world, those 2 things were always the same thing. He said he was devastated. He said Cassandra had been under enormous postpartum stress. He said he was deeply concerned for her mental health and for the safety of their newborn son. He said he loved them both and only wanted their safe return. He said the door was always open. He said my son 4 times. He said my wife twice. He said our family once, near the end where it would land most effectively. He did not say where he was for 26 hours while she was in labor. He did not say who Serena Voss was. He did not say why he smelled of someone else's perfume when he walked into the room where his son was sleeping. Cassandra ate her cereal. The milk had gone slightly warm. She had poured it too long ago. She watched her husband describe her as unstable on a television from 2004, and she ate her cereal, and she felt something inside her that was cold and specific and beginning to crystallize. Her mother appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. She watched the last 2 minutes of the press conference. When it ended, she said, "His hair is different." Cassandra said, "He got it cut for the cameras." Yes, Diane went back to the living room. Cassandra put the bowl in the sink. She turned off the television. She stood in the kitchen for a moment. She said to the room quietly, "I am not crazy. I know what I saw. I know what I smelled. I know what that name meant when it came up on his screen." She said it again, louder. "I am not crazy." The sound of her own voice in her mother's kitchen was grounding. It was the most certain thing she had said in weeks. She picked up her phone. She called Paige. Paige answered on the first ring. "I just watched it," she said. Her voice was doing something Cassandra had rarely heard from her. It was compressed, like she was holding several very large feelings in a very small space. "I cannot believe the postpartum stress thing." He stood there and he implied, "I know what he implied," Cassandra said. The absolute audacity, Paige, of that man standing at a podium with his logo behind him. "Paige," she said it gently, firmly. Paige stopped. "I am going to call Ruth Calloway," Cassandra said. Silence. "When?" Paige asked. "Today." She heard Paige exhale, a long, slow exhale, the sound of 8 years of bitten tongue finally being set down. "Okay," Paige said. "Okay, I am right here." She called Ruth Calloway at 2 in the afternoon. James was asleep. Diane had taken her car to the pharmacy and would be gone for an hour. The farmhouse was quiet. Ruth Calloway answered on the second ring. "Calloway," she said. Just her name. No preamble. Cassandra said, "My name is Cassandra Whitmore. My husband is Garrett Harlow. I left the hospital with my newborn son 14 days ago. He just held a press conference implying I am mentally unstable. I have documents I believe are relevant. I think we should meet." A pause. Not of surprise, the pause of someone picking up a pen. "Describe the documents," Ruth said. Cassandra described them. Another pause, longer this time, then Ruth said, "Can you be in Burlington on Thursday at 9 in the morning?" "Yes, good." A brief pause. "You said you were referred by Beverly Crane?" "Yes." "Good woman," Ruth said. There was warmth under the professionalism, just a layer. "I owe her more than I have ever properly expressed." She paused. "One more question. The baby. He is safe? He is healthy? He is perfect," Cassandra said. Ruth said, "Then we have everything we need to begin." She hung up. She sat with the phone in her hands. Her hands were steady. She had thought they might not be. She had been afraid, before she dialed, that her voice might shake, or her nerve might fail, or she might lose the cold, clear thing she had found that morning watching the press conference. But she had not lost it. Something was different now. It had been forming for 14 days. Since the hospital room, since the drive north, since the snow in the kitchen drawers at midnight and the lasagna and her father's voice breaking in exactly the way it broke. She knew what it was. She was done being quiet. The article appeared online that evening. A tabloid she had never read. A photograph taken 3 months ago outside a Manhattan restaurant. Garrett and Serena, at a table by the window, not incriminating by itself. They worked together. But the caption said, sources close to Harlow Global confirm chief executive's personal relationship with head of strategy predates wife's pregnancy. She read it once. She set her phone down. She picked James up from his bassinet. She carried him to the window. Outside, the Vermont fields were white and still. The sky was very clear. The afternoon light was the specific low gold of a November day that had used all its warmth efficiently. James was looking at the window with the total unfiltered attention of a 3-week-old encountering light. He watched it the way she wished she could watch things. Without history, without implication, without the weight of everything she knew. She thought he tried to control the story. He always controlled the story. The story was no longer his to control. The meeting with Ruth Calloway happened on a Thursday morning. Ruth's office was on the second floor of a brick building in Burlington, the kind of building that had been something else before it was an office. The floors were old wood. They made a sound when you walked on them. Ruth Calloway was 52 years old and looked like someone who had been underestimated professionally her entire life and had found this extremely useful. She had direct eyes and no visible patience for anything that was not directly relevant to the matter at hand. She set a cup of coffee in front of Cassandra. She said, "Do not watch the news this week. It helps him, and it does not help you." Cassandra said, "I know. I know you know," Ruth said. "I say it anyway because every client I have ever worked with who told me they knew watched the news compulsively for a month afterward." She opened a legal pad. "Tell me about the marriage. Start at the beginning. Be specific." Cassandra told her. She spoke for 40 minutes. She described the architecture of the marriage the way she would describe the architecture of a building. Load-bearing walls and decorative elements. What held weight and what was for appearance. Ruth listened without interrupting. She wrote occasionally. When Cassandra finished, Ruth said, "Prenuptial agreement? Yes. Terms?" Cassandra recited them. She had read the agreement more times in the past 3 weeks than in 8 years of marriage. She knew every clause, including subsection 14b, the infidelity clause, which stated that documented evidence of a sustained pattern of marital infidelity voided the asset limitation provisions. Not a single instance. A pattern. She had a pattern. Ruth nodded slowly. "Tell me about subsection 14b, she told her. Then she told her about the documents, the emails she had kept, the board meeting minutes, the financial communications that had passed through her personal email address, the 2 Delaware LLCs she had asked about casually at dinner 2 years ago and let Garrett explain away. She had not let them go. She had just set them aside. Ruth wrote for a long time. Then she said, "The Delaware LCS. Tell me what you know." Cassandra told her. Ruth put her pen down. She looked at Cassandra for a moment. Then she said, "I want you to sit with me in my car for a few minutes." She paused. "My office walls are institutional. I trust my staff. Conversations of this specific category benefit from a certain privacy." They moved to Ruth's car, a 10-year-old Volvo, in the parking garage below the building. Ruth started the engine for the heat. She sat in the passenger seat of a lawyer's 10-year-old Volvo in a parking garage in Burlington, Vermont. 3 weeks ago, she had been a billionaire's wife in a Manhattan penthouse. She thought about the specific distance between those two sentences. She thought, "I sat in the parking garage outside our apartment building for 45 minutes after the second IVF failure. I could not go up. Because when I went up, he would say the right things, and I would believe them, and I would not be allowed to be as broken as I actually was. He needed me to recover quickly. Recovery fit his schedule better than grief. I always process better in parking garages." "Nobody watches you in parking garages," Ruth said. "There are accounts in the Cayman Islands. In the name of a cousin of Garrett's, Marcus Harlow. Does that name mean anything to you?" "He came to 3 or 4 company events," Cassandra said. "I never heard him discussed in any professional context." "He is listed as the account holder," Ruth said. "But the account structure, based on what you have shown me and what I know of similar arrangements in high-asset divorce cases, suggests the accounts are effectively Garrett's personal holdings, structured to avoid appearing in any disclosure, including the prenuptial asset inventory." Cassandra was very still. "How much?" she said. Ruth said, "We will not know until we engage a forensic financial analyst. But the structure you have described suggests this has been building for years." Cassandra said, "If those accounts exist and were not disclosed in the prenuptial inventory, then the asset inventory is materially incomplete," Ruth said, "which raises significant questions about the agreement's validity." She paused. "We can challenge the 14b clause specifically, or we can challenge the entire agreement." Cassandra said, "What would you do?" Ruth said, "I would challenge everything." Outside the parking garage, Burlington went about its Thursday. People walked to lunch. Cars moved through intersections. A woman carried a very large coffee and what appeared to be half of a building department's filing boxes. Ordinary. Specific. Real. Cassandra said, I want to understand something. Ruth said, tell me. He is $3.2 billion. I have 41,000 in savings in a car. What is my actual position here? Ruth looked at her steadily. Your actual position, she said, is that you have been an integral part of the infrastructure of Harlow Global for 8 years. You attended strategy sessions and board events and maintained the social architecture of his executive life. You are the mother of his newborn son. You have a prenuptial agreement that may be invalid due to undisclosed assets, and you have documents. She paused. His money is significant. His sloppiness is more significant. Those two facts together are what we are working with. Cassandra said, okay? Okay? Ruth said, let us begin, Cassandra said. She said it without qualification, without the habit of hedging, without the years-long reflex of softening her own certainty so she did not take up too much room. She said it the way she used to say things when she was running her own firm. When she walked into rooms and knew what she was looking at, and said it clearly and moved forward, she said, let us begin. Ruth Calloway looked at her with an expression that was professional and warm and contained, just barely, something that might have been satisfaction. Good, she said. That evening, after Ruth had dropped her at the farmhouse and driven away, Cassandra stood on the porch for a moment in the cold. She said to the dark Vermont sky, I deserved better than this. I knew it. I stayed anyway because I believed in something, and leaving was not a small thing, and I was not wrong to try. But I am choosing something different now. And that is mine to choose, she said at once. She went inside. She was not angry in the way she had expected. She had expected anger to feel hot and volatile. Instead, it was cold, precise, structural, the kind of anger that knew what it wanted and understood exactly how to get it. She was an architect. She built things. She had been trying to hold something up that was not worth holding. She was going to stop now. She was going to build something else. She baked her mother's shortbread that night. She had not baked it in years. She did not know she still knew the recipe by heart until her hands were already doing it. The familiar weight of the butter, the particular ratio of flour she had learned from watching Diane make it every December since childhood. The kitchen filled with a smell that was specific and warm and belonged to every version of herself she had ever been. She did not think about the meeting or the legal strategy or the documents or Garrett or anything at all. She just baked. James slept in his bouncer on the counter beside her. She slid the pan into the oven. She set the timer. She leaned against the counter and listened to the oven tick and the timer count, and her son breathe and the house settle around her in the Vermont dark. It came on day 32. No particular trigger. James had slept reasonably well. 2 wakings instead of 4. Diane was in her own room. The farmhouse was quiet, and Cassandra sat down on the floor of the back bedroom at 3 in the morning and fell completely apart. Not dramatically. Quietly. The way the most serious things happen. She sat with her back against the wall under the window and put her face in her hands, and she cried in the way she had not cried since the delivery room. Not the measured kind. Not the kind you manage. The kind that takes you over entirely. The kind that sounds different from regular crying. The kind that goes back further than the current wound. She thought, I gave up my firm. I had a practice. I was building something. I designed buildings that people lived inside and worked inside and sent their children to, and I walked away from all of it. And for what? For the role of Garrett Harlow's wife. For a function. For the architecture of his image. She thought, I went through 3 rounds of IVF. And I managed every appointment and every medication and every phone call from the clinic. And after the first failure, I sat in the car for 40 minutes before I could go upstairs. And after the second failure, I did not cry until he fell asleep because I did not want him to see it. And I called that consideration, but it was not consideration. It was training. I had trained myself not to be inconvenient in my grief. She thought, my son is 5 weeks old and I am hiding in my mother's farmhouse. Not technically hiding, but hidden. And I do not know if I made the right choice. I do not know if he will grow up resenting what I did. I do not know if I am enough for this. I do not know if I am strong enough to do this alone. I do not know if I am a good mother. That one landed differently from the others. It did not feel like a thought. It felt like a verdict delivered in a courtroom she had built inside herself. She should call someone. She did not call anyone. It was 3 in the morning, and she should sleep, and she could not sleep. And she should be stronger than this, and she was not stronger than this right now, and there was nobody in the room and nothing to perform, so she just sat on the floor and let it be what it was. The floor was cold through her socks. She did not move. James shifted in the bassinet. not waking, just adjusting, the small sounds of a baby resettling, then quiet again. She looked at him from the floor. His face in the nightlight was entirely at rest. He trusted everything completely. He trusted the bassinet and the air and the temperature of the room and her. He trusted her. He had no basis for doubt, and she had to hold that for him until he was old enough to choose trust for himself. What if I cannot do this? The thought arrived clean and specific. What if he asks me one day why his father was not in the room when he was born, and I do not have an answer that is good enough for a child who deserves a real one? What if he grows up without something he needed? What if I am the cause of the shape of that absence? Then on the floor, at 3 in the morning, a different thought, quieter than the others, smaller, more certain. He was not in the room because he chose to be somewhere else. Not me, he chose. He chose to not be there. He chose to send a text that said had to handle something. He chose to arrive in a fresh suit 26 hours later. He chose Serena Voss on the night his son was born. He built the life that made leaving the safest choice. He is the reason the room was empty, not me. She sat with that. She sat with it for a long time. Then she said, to her hands, to the floor, to the dark room, I did not do this to my son. This was done to us. And I am here. On this floor at 3 in the morning because I am not gone, which means I am not giving up, which means I am exactly the mother who shows up, even when showing up means sitting in the dark and surviving until morning. She said it out loud. She needed to hear it in her own voice. She got up at 3:45. She went to the bathroom. She washed her face with cold water. She looked at herself in the mirror. This mirror had been here since she was 13. She had looked at herself in it through every version of herself she had ever been. First day of high school. The night she left for college. The Christmas she came back with Garrett for the first time and stood in this bathroom telling herself it was going to be fine. The mirror had seen everything. She did not recognize the woman in it right now. She did not mean this as a bad thing. She was meeting someone new. She went back to the room. She did not lie down. She sat in the chair beside the bassinet. She opened the laptop on the small table beside the chair. She opened a blank document. She typed at the top who I was before I became his wife. She wrote architectural designer, firm owner, the person who designed a school in Brooklyn where 200 children go every morning, the person who can read a blueprint and a room and a building and a person, the person who spent 8 years making herself smaller, the person who is going to stop doing that now. She closed the laptop. She looked at James. He had opened his eyes. He was looking at the window. The earliest gray of morning was just beginning in the glass. Good morning, she said. He turned toward her voice. He did not smile yet. That was weeks away. But something in his face organized itself in her direction. More certain. More settled. She was enough. The evidence was in the bassinet. She called Warren Duffield on a Wednesday at 9 in the morning. She had thought about this call for 2 weeks. She had written down what she would say and thrown the paper away and decided not to call and decided to call and picked up the phone 3 times and put it down. The 4th time she dialed. He answered on the 2nd ring. Duffield. She said, Mr. Duffield. This is Cassandra Whitmore Harlow. A pause. A specific kind of pause. Then quietly, I was wondering when you would call. That was not what she expected. She said nothing for a moment. He said, are you and the baby safe? Yes. Good. A long exhale. I am glad to hear that. He paused. I cannot speak from this office. Can you give me an hour? She gave him an hour. He called back from his car. She recognized the acoustic, the specific quality of a voice inside a vehicle in cold weather. He had driven somewhere private. He said, I have been at Harlow Global for 19 years, since before the company was what it is now. Since the first real estate developments in New Jersey, I have watched Garrett build something genuinely significant. He paused. I have also watched him make a series of choices over the last 6 years that I noted as problems and never treated with the seriousness they deserved. She waited. I am 57 years old, he said. I have a daughter who is 29. Her name is Claire. She is currently working in San Francisco and she calls me twice a week, and she has very specific and accurate opinions about how men behave in institutions. He paused. I have been thinking about what Claire would say about what I have done and not done in the last 6 years. She said, what have you done? He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she almost spoke again. Then he said, there are 2 Delaware LLCs you are aware of. There are also 3 accounts in the Cayman Islands. They are structured as personal investment vehicles for a company officer. The documentation names the officer as Garrett's cousin, Marcus Harlow. Marcus is aware of the accounts but has no functional control over them. They are effectively Garrett's personal holdings, structured to avoid appearing in corporate or personal asset disclosures. She was very still. Including the prenuptial agreement's asset inventory, he said. She said, how much? He told her, $41 million. She said nothing. The number sat in the air between them. On a telephone call, in 2 cars in 2 different states. She thought, 41,000 in my savings account. 41 million in accounts that were supposed to be declared and were not. There is a profound and specific irony in those 2 numbers being the same word. He said, I have authorized quarterly reviews that classified those accounts as a relative's private investment portfolio, and therefore outside the scope of corporate audit review. I signed off on that classification 3 times. A pause. I will not sign off on it a 4th time. She said, what do you want in return? Nothing, he said. She did not entirely believe this. That is unusual, I know. A pause. I do not want money. I do not want immunity. My attorneys tell me my exposure is ethical rather than criminal, and I believe them. I want to be able to answer Claire's question when she asked me why I finally said something. He paused. This call is the answer. Today. She said, I need to connect you with my attorney. He said, I expected that. And then in his voice, under the measured professional tone, she heard something she recognized. The specific quality of relief, of a decision finally made. Her name? Ruth Calloway, she said. A pause. I have heard of her. He said it with what might very quietly have been respect. Good. After she hung up, she stood at the kitchen window for a long time. She thought, I knew something was wrong with the financial picture. I knew the way you know a building is structurally unsound when the proportions are slightly off, and you cannot put the specific words to it, but your body registers it anyway. My body knew. I kept it in the drawer. Warren Duffield was in the drawer. 19 years of it. And now it is out. She called Ruth immediately. Ruth listened to the full account without interrupting. Then she said, Cassandra, do you understand what $41 million in undisclosed assets means in the context of a 14B challenge? She said, tell me. It means the prenuptial agreement may be invalid not partially but entirely, not just the asset limitations. All of it. Ruth paused. We are going to file, she called Paige after that. Paige answered and Cassandra said, before Paige could speak, somewhere along the way I became invisible. I became furniture in my own marriage. I am done with that. Paige said, okay, I am going to fight with everything I have. Which is more than I realized. Paige said, I know. She said it like she had always known. Like she had been waiting specifically for Cassandra to arrive at this sentence. I know. That evening, her phone showed a missed call from Eleanor Harlow. She called back. Eleanor answered on the 3rd ring. Cassandra, just her name, said with the weight of a woman who had rehearsed this conversation, I hope the baby is well. He is perfect. Thank you. I heard his name is James. A pause. My father's name was James. Cassandra had not known this. Yes, she said. A long silence. Then Eleanor said, I owe you a conversation I should have had years ago. I knew things about my son's patterns that I chose to call private matters. She paused. I was protecting the wrong thing. I want you to know I understand that now. Cassandra said, I hear you, Eleanor. I will not testify against my son. I cannot do that. But woman to woman, I believe you. I have always known what kind of man he became. She paused. I am sorry. I am saying it without agenda. I simply need you to know. Thank you, Cassandra said. After they hung up, Cassandra sat with the phone in her hands. She thought, the people who were supposed to protect me did not. Beverly did. My mother did. Warren Duffield, 57 years old with a daughter named Claire, finally did. Eleanor in the only way she could. Small acts from unexpected directions. That is what the world looks like when you stop waiting for the one large rescue and start accepting the smaller real ones. She took James for a walk in his stroller. Cold enough for the full bundle, the thick suit, the hat, the fleece blanket over his lap. She walked the road in front of the farmhouse. The afternoon light was pale and flat. The fields on either side were white and quiet. James was awake and looking at everything with his complete, uncurated attention. A crow landed in a bare tree at the edge of the field. James tracked it. He watched it the way you watch something when it is the most interesting thing in the world, which for him it was, because everything was still the most interesting thing in the world. She walked to the pine trees and back, 23 minutes. When she got home, she felt different than when she left. Not lighter, more solid, more like herself, more like the woman whose name she had typed at the top of a document at 3 in the morning. The one who was still here. Paige Donovan arrived on a Tuesday. She came with a duffel bag and 2 bottles of wine and the expression of a woman who had been restraining herself from doing this for 6 weeks and was done restraining. She walked into the farmhouse and hugged Diane and went to the bassinet and said to James, in the voice she reserved for things she found genuinely miraculous, You are the most extraordinary thing that has ever existed, and I cannot believe I have not been here sooner to tell you that personally. James looked at her. He did not cry. This, Cassandra knew, was his version of approval. Then Paige set a small black thumb drive on the kitchen table and said, I need you to not ask me too many questions about how this came to exist. Cassandra looked at the drive. She looked at Paige. Paige sat down. She said, Serena Voss has an assistant. The assistant has a best friend. The best friend does event planning. I do event planning. She said this as though it were a simple series of factual statements requiring no elaboration. We had a professional conversation. Colleagues talking. Cassandra said, Paige, I have done nothing illegal. I want to be clear about that. My colleague mentioned that her best friend had recently, before resigning, taken photographs of certain internal communications for her own personal documentation. Paige paused. The assistant resigned 3 weeks ago. Apparently she had been told things about Garrett's plans for his marriage that have turned out to be inaccurate. Cassandra said, he told Serena he was leaving me. After the baby, Paige said, according to the emails. She looked at the drive. It was very small. It weighed nothing. She thought about the size of a thing compared to its significance. How everything that mattered to this case, everything she had built over 6 weeks, fit in objects smaller than her palm. He coached her, Paige said, on what to say if the prenuptial challenge went to court, what language to use, how to position certain things. She paused. What he did not tell her was that he was also positioning her to take the fall for the offshore account structures. He was going to use her testimony to redirect attention, and then, once she had served that purpose, he was going to make sure everything pointed at her. Cassandra said he was going to sacrifice her. The moment she was more useful as a scapegoat than as a girlfriend, Paige said. She said it with the flat precision of someone who had spent 6 weeks thinking about this carefully. She does not know it yet. That is what her assistant found in the emails. Cassandra picked up the drive. She held it in her palm. She thought, this is the entire architecture of a man's deception. Right here. Smaller than my phone. Lighter than a pen. She had spent 8 years trying to understand a man who was very large in her life. And here was his smallness. Here it was. She called Ruth that evening. Ruth said, send it to me tonight. All of it? All of it. My team will review before the end of the week. A pause. How was it obtained? Cassandra described it. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Cassandra could almost hear her making the legal calculation. Then she said, an employee documented materials from her own professional accounts before resignation. For personal records. That is arguable. It is significantly better than not having it. She paused. Send everything. Cassandra sent everything. That night, after James was down and Paige was in the guest room, Cassandra and Diane sat at the kitchen table with one of Paige's bottles of wine. Diane said, what happens next? Cassandra said, Ruth files. With everything we have. The Duffield affidavit, the documentation, all of it. She turned her glass. He is going to offer to settle at some point. Ruth says he will not want full discovery. The board will not want full discovery. What do you want? Diane said. Cassandra thought. She said, James's future. Documented, funded, guaranteed. That is the first thing. She paused, and I want my name back. Diane looked at her. I want to be Cassandra Whitmore again, she said, before anything else. I want that done first. Her mother nodded slowly. Good, she said. And I want to open my firm again, Cassandra said. She said it quietly, testing the weight of it. Then again, more clearly, I want to open my firm, my own, not as money, what is owed to me. And I am going to build with it. Diane said, I will babysit. She said it simply. Like it was already decided. Like it was the most practical and obvious thing in the world. Because for Diane Whitmore it was. Cassandra laughed. It was genuine. Brief. Startled out of her. She could not remember the last time she had laughed at something without calculating first whether it was the right moment. Paige appeared in the doorway. Did someone pour wine and not tell me? Diane poured her a glass. They sat at the kitchen table, the three of them, with the Vermont dark outside, and James asleep in the back room and the wine and the warmth of the farmhouse doing what the farmhouse always did, holding everything inside it without asking anything in return. Cassandra thought, I thought love meant sacrifice. I sacrificed everything I had built, and I called it love, and it was not love. It was a transaction, and I did not know the terms. I know them now. I know exactly what they were and what they were worth and what I am going to do about it. She did not say it out loud. She just held it. It was enough. Ruth filed on a Monday. By Tuesday evening, Garrett's legal team had responded with a counterfiling that was 27 pages long. Ruth called Cassandra with the news. She said, 27 pages is not confidence. 27 pages is a team that is worried. The counterfiling argued, parental alienation. Maternal instability evidenced by the departure from the marital residence. Unlawful removal of a minor child from his state of established residence. It requested an emergency custody hearing. Ruth filed her response in 36 pages. It included Warren Duffield's sworn affidavit. It included the documentation Cassandra had retained. It referenced the thumb drive contents, carefully framed. It included Beverly Crane's written statement about the birth. Beverly's statement was 2 pages, clinical, precise. It stated the facts of the night of November 14th, the hours of labor, the 4 unanswered phone calls, the 3 unanswered texts, the delivery of James Harlow, the father's absence. It ended with one sentence. In 22 years of labor and delivery nursing, I have never witnessed a father absent whose wife had contacted him 7 times during active labor. Not a judgment, a fact. Beverly Crane stated facts. The Vermont Family Court scheduled the custody hearing for 3 weeks out. Garrett's attorneys filed for an expedited date. The judge's clerk responded that the court operated on its own schedule and was not responsive to terms like expedited from out-of-state counsel. Hearing preparation took 4 days. Ruth's team included 2 associates and a forensic financial analyst named Graham, who had the specific quality of a man who had spent 30 years looking at numbers that were trying to hide and who found this genuinely enjoyable. He reviewed what Cassandra had provided and what Warren Duffield had submitted, and he said, at the end of the second day, in a measured and precise voice, the offshore account structure is interesting. It is designed to be invisible. It is not designed to withstand this level of scrutiny. He said it the way someone says interesting when they mean we have them. She drove past a house on the way to Burlington, a house on a road she had driven 1,000 times in high school. Her friend Amanda's house. She had told Amanda the week after she started dating Garrett that he was the most impressive person she had ever met. She had used that word without hesitation. She would not use it now. She had met more impressive people in the last 3 months than in all the years before. Beverly Crane in her scrubs at 11:47 at night saying, "You are doing this. Look at what you are doing." Ruth Calloway, who had seen everything twice and remained unshaken. Warren Duffield, 57 years old, who chose to do the right thing 19 years late, and chose it anyway because his daughter had a question he needed to be able to answer. Diane, who answered the phone and said, "Tell me what you need." Paige, who came with a thumb drive and said, "I have done nothing illegal," in the tone of a woman who had done just enough. These were impressive people. She passed the house. She kept driving. The custody hearing took place on a Thursday morning in Burlington. Garrett appeared in person. 3 attorneys beside him. He did not look at Cassandra when they entered the room. He looked at James in her arms. Something moved across his face when he saw him. She did not analyze it. She had spent 8 years analyzing his expressions. She had been wrong often enough that she had decided to stop. He was 40 pounds of solid toddler in her arms. He was 7 months old now and had opinions about everything. He had an opinion about the courtroom, which he expressed by studying the ceiling with great seriousness, and then making a small declarative sound. She held him steady. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Ruth presented, Garrett's team presented, the forensic analyst presented 2 pages of findings. The child development specialist testified that James was thriving in a stable and nurturing environment. Garrett's team had a psychiatrist who had reviewed Cassandra's medical records for 48 hours without meeting her. Ruth cross-examined him for 11 minutes. Cassandra watched it. She had spent 11 minutes in Garrett's hallways on phone calls that ran over. 11 minutes was very short when you were waiting. 11 minutes was very long when Ruth Calloway had your argument and your documents, and 3 decades of doing exactly this. The judge, a woman in her mid-60s with reading glasses and a Vermont accent, and the unhurried authority of someone who had presided over this courtroom for 18 years, did not rule from the bench. She said she would issue a decision within 10 days. She said James would remain with his mother pending the decision. Garrett's attorneys immediately began arguing about visitation terms. The judge said through the family court coordinator. Then she stood and the bailiff called, "All rise." Cassandra walked out of the courthouse. Ruth walked beside her. Ruth said, "You were exactly right in that room." Cassandra said, "I told the truth." "Yes," Ruth said. "That is what I mean." Outside, the Vermont air was cold and specific. The sky was the particular gray of early spring, still cold, not yet green, the season that looked like nothing and was secretly everything. She had to choose between the life she had built and the life worth protecting. She had made that choice. She was standing in the result of it. She was not afraid. Breathing room mid-chapter 10, she called Paige that afternoon. She described the hearing in full, and Paige said yes and good, and that woman sounds formidable approximately 11 times. Then Paige said, how do you feel? And Cassandra said, tired. And Paige said, good tired or bad tired? And Cassandra said, good, I think good. And Paige said, okay, I love you. Call me when the ruling comes. And Cassandra said, I will. She hung up and made tea. Not coffee, tea. Her mother's chamomile, in the same spot in the same cabinet for 20 years. She made the tea and sat at the kitchen table and held the mug with both hands because the mug was warm, and right now warmth that was simple was exactly what she needed. She did not think about the ruling, she did not plan or strategize or wonder. She just sat with her mug and let the warmth come through the ceramic into her palms and breathed. Serena Voss called on a Saturday morning. Cassandra stared at the name on the screen for a long time. She was nursing James. He was 8 months old and eating solid food now in addition to this, and he had opinions about the solid food, particularly about bananas, which he found insulting. She answered. Serena said, I know you have no reason to speak to me. Cassandra said, tell me why I should. A pause. Then, because I found out what he was planning to do with my testimony, she said it flat, not dramatic. The flatness of someone absorbing a blow. I did not know. About the positioning, about what he was going to use me for. Cassandra said, how did you find out? My assistant contacted me before she left. She told me what she had given to your attorney. A pause. I reviewed the full email thread, including the parts I had not been meant to find. Silence. He was going to use me, Serena said. He coached me on what to say and what to position and how to frame the financial conversations, and the whole time the framing he was giving me was designed to make me the face of the asset structure issue if it ever became public. She stopped, started again. He told me he was going to leave you after the baby. He needed to manage the timing. He just needed time. She paused. He was managing the timing so that he would have a plan in place to protect his assets before the divorce. I was part of the plan, and then I was going to be the part that took the fall. Cassandra said, what do you want? A long pause. I want to give you a statement, on the record, about what he represented to me, about the financial conversations and what he told me they were for. She paused. I am not doing this to help you specifically. I am doing it because he lied to me about every significant thing, and I refuse to continue being useful to someone who saw me as a tool. Cassandra said, I understand that motivation. I know you do, Serena said quietly. A silence. Not hostile. Just two women on either side of a very large amount of damage. I am sorry about the night he was not at the hospital, Serena said. I did not know you were in labor. He told me it was a business emergency. He called it a situation. She paused. I know that does not change anything. Cassandra was quiet. Then she said, it matters that you say it. Okay, Serena said, very quietly. I will have my attorney contact you, Cassandra said. Yes, Serena said. That is right. She hung up. She sat with the phone. James was looking at her. She thought every person he used as an instrument is now telling the truth. Beverly. Warren. His own mother in her careful way. Serena. The people he positioned around himself to manage his image have become, one by one, the exact evidence that dismantles it. He is very good at building structures. He never accounted for the people inside them. She called Ruth. Ruth's response to the news of Serena's call was a long pause, followed by, well, another pause. That is not what I expected on a Saturday. Cassandra said, she is ready to give a statement. Ruth said, I will call her Monday morning. A pause. Cassandra. This changes the shape of the case significantly. Cassandra said, I know. The ruling from the custody hearing arrived on Tuesday. 10 days exactly. Joint legal custody. Primary physical residence with Cassandra in Vermont, pending resolution of the divorce proceedings. Scheduled visitation for Garrett through the family court coordinator, and a specific note in the written ruling that the father's documented absence at the birth and the subsequent press conference, characterizing the mother's departure as evidence of mental instability, were taken into the court's assessment of each parent's judgment and fitness. Ruth called with the ruling at 8:15 in the morning. Cassandra was in the kitchen. James was in his high chair eating scrambled eggs with the serious concentration of someone discovering scrambled eggs for the first time, which he was. She sat down on the kitchen floor, not in distress. Just because the kitchen floor was where she was when important things happened, and the kitchen floor felt like the right place for this one. She put her hand over her eyes. She breathed. Thank you, she said to Ruth. Then what is next? We file the formal divorce proceeding now, Ruth said. With the full Duffield affidavit, the Voss statement when we have it, and the complete financial analysis. She paused. He will offer to settle within 30 days. His board does not want this to go to full discovery. His institutional investors do not want it. The Cayman account issue alone is a problem for the company, not just the marriage. Cassandra said, what do I want in a settlement? Ruth said, that is the right question. What do you want? She had thought about this. She had been thinking about it since the 3 a.m. floor and the list and the meeting in the Volvo in the parking garage. She had been building the answer the way she built everything, starting with the structure. What was load-bearing? What had to be there? She said James's future, education, security. I want it in writing and I want it irrevocable. Yes, my name, Whitmore, before anything else. Yes, my share of what I am owed. 8 years of being the infrastructure of his public life. The apartment I designed, the equity in that. She paused, and I want enough to open my firm again. My own. Not as charity, what I am legally owed, and I am going to build with it. Yes, Ruth said. What else? Cassandra thought for a moment. There is one more thing, she said. Non-negotiable. Tell me, she told her. Ruth was quiet. Then she said that, she said, is the right thing to ask for. She had spent 20 years making herself smaller so he could feel larger. She was done shrinking. She was done shrinking in every possible direction. The deposition took place in Ruth's conference room on a Wednesday morning in early spring. 10 o'clock. James was 8 months old and with Diane. Cassandra drove herself. She wore a gray blazer she had bought online last month. Not the kind of thing she would have worn as Garrett's wife. That version of her would have worn something more deliberate, more branded, more performing. This was just a blazer. It fit correctly. It was not trying to say anything. That was exactly what she wanted. She arrived 10 minutes early. She sat in the conference room alone, both feet flat on the floor, hands on the table. She breathed, long and deliberate, the way Beverly had taught her to breathe, through contractions, not fighting the wave, moving with it, staying in the breath. Garrett arrived at 10 exactly, his legal team with him. He was in the charcoal suit. Of course he was. He saw her. He did not look surprised. He had known she would be here. But something moved through his face when he actually looked at her in person for the first time in 18 months. He had expected to find something he recognized, something he knew how to manage. She could see him looking for it, the version of her he was accustomed to. It was not there, he said. Cass? Ruth said, Mr. Harlow. Precisely. Cutting across the use of her client's name the way you cut across an overreach. Please be seated. They sat. The court reporter sat up at the end of the table. The recorder started. Garrett's deposition went first. His attorneys had prepared him thoroughly. He was smooth, controlled, and described 8 years of a human life with the precision of a project timeline. He described the marriage as strong and loving until the unexpected and concerning episode following the birth. He described his arrival at the hospital within a reasonable time frame given the circumstances of his professional responsibilities that evening. He used the phrase professional responsibilities 3 times. Ruth cross-examined him. She had the Duffield affidavit. She had the Voss statement. She had Beverly Crane's documentation. She had the emails. She had 3 years of board meeting minutes. She asked each question with the patience of someone who knew exactly where it led. Garrett said, I do not recall 11 times. Garrett said, that is not what happened. 4 times, Garrett said. Let us be rational about this. Twice, Ruth said, Mr. Harlow. Where were you between the hours of 10 p.m. and 11:47 p.m. on the night of November 14th? He said he was managing a business situation. Can you describe the nature of the business situation? He did not recall. Were you with Serena Voss during that period? His attorneys objected. Ruth noted the objection and asked the question again. He did not recall. Ruth placed Serena Voss's signed statement on the table in front of him. She let him read it. He read it. He took his time. His face performed controlled concern. Then he looked up. Ruth said, would you like me to read you the relevant passage, Mr. Harlow? He said that would not be necessary. Then Cassandra gave her deposition. She sat across from Garrett Harlow for the first time in 18 months. She did not study him. She had studied him enough. She looked at the court reporter when she spoke. She looked at Ruth when Ruth asked questions. She looked at the table when she needed a moment. She did not perform anything. She just told the truth. She described the marriage in order and accurately. The firm she had closed. The IVF appointments. The social infrastructure she had maintained for 8 years. The night of the birth. The 26 hours. The fresh suit. The perfume. The name on the phone screen. She described the drive north. The farmhouse. What she had kept and why. She described Ruth Calloway's card and Beverly Crane's face when she handed it over, and the specific quality of that exchange, which was 2 women who did not know each other communicating something true across the professional distance of a hospital hallway. She did not perform victimhood. She did not perform strength. She stated what happened. In order. Precisely. When she finished, the room was quiet. Garrett's lead attorney said, Miss Whitmore. He caught himself on the name. Ruth had corrected him twice before. He had finally adjusted. You have characterized Mr. Harlow in significant terms. Would you say that your own decision to leave the state with a newborn child was? Cassandra said, I left a hospital with my son and drove to my mother's house. He was not at the hospital when I was discharged. He had visited for 20 minutes and spent 12 of those minutes on a phone call in the hallway. I assessed the situation and I made a decision. She paused. The Vermont Family Court reviewed that decision at considerable length and found it consistent with the judgment of a responsible parent. She let that land. Do you have a different question? The attorney did not ask another question. Ruth let a moment pass. Then she gathered her materials with the efficiency of someone who was satisfied without needing to perform satisfaction. During the brief recess that followed, the attorney stepped out to confer. Cassandra and Garrett were left in the room alone. For the first time, he said, You did not have to do this. She said, I know. We could have handled it privately. You made it public, she said. The press conference. The statement about my mental health. You made those choices. I responded to the situation you created. She paused. I think that is rational. Isn't that the word you prefer? Rational. He was quiet. Then he said her name again. Just her name, Cass. In the private voice. The one she used to believe. She said, Cassandra. We are on the record. He said, James, how is he? She said, he is extraordinary. You would know that if you had been in the room. The door opened. The attorneys returned. The session concluded. Garrett left without looking back. Ruth caught up with her in the hallway. She said quietly, That was one of the finest depositions I have witnessed in 30 years. Cassandra said, I told the truth. The truth was sufficient, Ruth said. It almost always is. People forget that. She paused. The settlement offer will come within 30 days. I am confident of that. Cassandra put on her coat. She thought he could not find the version of me he was used to. He was looking for the woman who apologized before the confrontation, who softened the hardest sentences, who gave him the off-ramp. She was not here. She had been leaving for a long time. She was finished now. She walked out of the building into the Vermont spring. The air smelled of mud and cold water and something that might have been the beginning of green. Not quite there, but arriving. She was arriving too. Breathing room, end of chapter 12. She packed the Manhattan apartment alone on a Saturday 3 weeks later. Diane had James. She drove to the city for the first time since the hospital. She used her key. The apartment was exactly as she had left it. She walked through each room. She had designed these rooms. Every sightline, every material, every window proportion chosen to bring the right quality of light into the right space at the right time of day. She ran her hand along the wall in the living room. Good construction. She had always built good things. She went room to room. Not in grief, in acknowledgement. These rooms had been hers, and she had been good in them, and some of what happened in them had been real. She gave herself 1 hour to say goodbye to the version of herself who had lived here. She did not rush it. She did not cry. When the hour was done, she locked the door. She handed the key to the realtor waiting in the lobby. She walked out. She got in her car. She drove north. The settlement offer arrived 26 days after the deposition. Ruth called on a Tuesday afternoon. He has sent an offer, she said. Cassandra was at the kitchen table with James, who was in his high chair eating something that had begun its life as a sweet potato. He had strong feelings about sweet potatoes. They were positive feelings, expressed energetically. Tell me, she said. Ruth told her. Joint legal custody confirmed. Primary physical residence with Cassandra confirmed. Visitation through the court coordinator. Financial terms, 40% of the total assessed marital estate, calculated with the Cayman accounts included following their forensic review and disclosure. A trust for James, structured with a named trustee independent of Garrett, funded immediately and irrevocably, covering his education through graduate school and providing a foundation for his financial security into adulthood. Ownership of the Manhattan apartment transferred to Cassandra outright. A public statement from Garrett Harlow retracting his characterization of Cassandra's departure as evidence of mental health concerns and confirming that she acted as a responsible parent in the best interest of their newborn son. Ruth named the total financial value. Cassandra sat down. She was already sitting. She sat down further. Ruth said, This is a strong offer. It reflects the board's assessment of what happens if this goes to full trial with the Duffield affidavit in the public record. They do not want that. His major investors do not want it. He does not want it. She paused. What do you want to do? She thought about what the offer contained and what it did not contain. She thought about full trial and what that would cost. In time, in energy, in proximity to something she was trying to move beyond. She had been building toward a life, not toward a war. She said, Add one thing. Ruth said, Tell me. She said the retraction statement. It cannot be a written release distributed to media. He has to give a press conference. The same format he used, the same cameras. He stands at a lectern and says it out loud. She paused. That is not negotiable. Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, in a voice that had 30 years of professionalism and, underneath it, the very faint quality of something that was not quite a smile, that is exactly right. She paused. I will add it. Garrett's attorneys responded within 48 hours. They accepted. The papers were signed. The retraction press conference was scheduled for the following Thursday. Cassandra did not attend. She was not in the city. She was in Vermont. Paige was on the couch. Diane was in the kitchen making something elaborate. James was on the floor investigating a board book about farm animals. He had very specific opinions about the pig. Paige pulled it up on her laptop at 2 in the afternoon. Garrett appeared on screen. The charcoal suit. The lectern. The cameras. He had the expression of a man who was performing grace under conditions he found personally objectionable. He read from the statement. He said the characterization of his wife's departure in his previous public statement was inaccurate and unfair. He said she had acted responsibly in seeking a safe environment for their newborn son. He said he regretted the distress caused by the statement. He said it looking at the cameras. He said it without conviction. He said it. Paige closed the laptop. She said he hated every word of that. Cassandra said, yes. Good, Paige said. Simply, definitively. Good. That evening, Serena Voss sent a text. It said, I watched it. I hope you and your son are well. Cassandra replied, thank you. Nothing else. That was enough. Warren Duffield retired from Harlow Global the following month. He sent a card, 3 lines. I am proud of the conversation we had and what you did with it. Your son will know when he is old enough to understand these things that his mother is the kind of woman who does not flinch. With regards. He signed his full name. Formal. Considered. She put the card in James's memory box. He would want to know one day about the people who helped. About the people who finally chose correctly. Eleanor Harlow sent a Thanksgiving card in November. Inside, in her precise handwriting, she had written, the silver cup was always his. James will decide for himself what name he carries. I hope you are building something beautiful. She was. She had already started. She had been building from the moment she turned the key in the parking garage and drove north and let herself be the kind of mother who shows up even when showing up means sitting on the floor in the dark. It was March. James was 15 months old. He walked now. With the specific gait of a determined toddler who found walking simultaneously hilarious and precarious and did not see why this should stop him from attempting it at all times. He said mama. He said buff for bird. He said for dog. He made a sound that might have been tree when he saw the pines at the end of the road. He had opinions about all vegetables and most fruits and the specific book about farm animals and the song his grandmother sang that he had decided was the correct song for all occasions. Cassandra had signed a lease. Not in Vermont. Not in Manhattan. In Brooklyn. A corner unit on the 3rd floor of a converted building 4 blocks from the school she had designed in 2017. A school that had opened on schedule and had been running for 8 years, and had, in the time since she designed it, acquired a mural on the east-facing exterior wall, painted in the colors she would have chosen because the person who painted it had understood what the light on that wall required. She had walked past that school 3 times on the day she went to look at the space. She had stood outside it for a long time. She watched a class of 8-year-olds in the window of the 3rd-floor reading room. The reading room she had designed with a specific window orientation to bring afternoon light in at an angle that would not produce glare on the page. The children were reading. The light was exactly as she had intended. She had built that room without knowing those children would be in it. She had built it for any children who would ever be in it. That was what she had always loved about her work. The building outlasted the argument about whether you belonged in the room. She signed the lease the same week. Whitmore Design and Architecture, LLC, registered in New York State. Her name only. She had 1 associate so far. Corinne, 26 years old, freshly graduated with her master's from Columbia. When Cassandra described the firm she wanted to build human scale, community-focused, spaces designed for the people inside them, rather than for the people who commissioned them, Corinne had said, that is the exact firm I have been looking for. They had started 2 weeks ago. Paige had announced a party for next Saturday that she described as intimate. Cassandra had been Paige's friend for 15 years and had a thorough understanding of what Paige's definition of intimate meant. She had said, okay. Diane had moved temporarily to Brooklyn. She would go back to Vermont in the summer, she said, when James was old enough to be useful in a garden. She said this with the certainty of a woman who knew exactly when children became interesting to plants. She had been seeing Dr. Sandra Fielding since January. Thursday mornings. Sandra's office was on the Upper West Side, in a brownstone with high ceilings and good light. Sandra was 55 and had eyes that saw things without making you feel examined. She asked questions that were really permissions. She had said, in the 5th session, something Cassandra had been thinking about since. She had said, "You keep describing this period as rebuilding. I want to offer a different frame. What if you were not rebuilding? What if you were just building? For the first time with no one else's specifications. Just building." She had been thinking about it for 3 months. The office space needed work. High ceilings. A corner with east and south exposure. A window she had stood in front of for 10 minutes the first day she saw the space, unable to move away from it, because the light was coming in at exactly the angle she had been working toward her whole career. The space was not finished yet. That was fine. She knew how to finish spaces. She took James there on a Saturday morning. She did not yet have furniture, just her laptop on the floor in the corner and a messenger bag. James in his stroller in the doorway. Sunlight moving across the empty floor. She unbuckled him from the stroller. He stood. He looked around, then he walked. His sideways, determined, slightly gravity-defying walk across the empty floor, touching each wall as he came to it, running his palm along the plaster the way she always ran her palm along a wall when she was assessing it, the specific vocabulary of a person who took materials seriously. She watched him. He went to the corner window. He put both palms flat on the glass. He looked down at the street below, the Saturday morning Brooklyn street, a coffee cart on the corner, 2 people walking dogs that were apparently acquainted and very excited about it, a woman on a bicycle who rang her bell for no visible reason, the specific, beautiful, ordinary Saturday aliveness of a city going about its weekend. James turned and looked at Cassandra. "Mama," he said. She went to the window. She stood beside him. The light was exactly right. It was coming in at the angle she had known it would when she signed the lease, because she had come in the morning to check, and she had come in the afternoon to check, and she had stood in this corner and watched the light move, and she had known. She thought, this is what I had before I had any of this. The ability to stand in a room and understand what it could become. That was mine before he was in my life, and it is mine now, and it was never in his keeping to begin with. He could not have taken it. He did not know it was there. She thought, 3 rounds of IVF. And a hospital room at 11:47 at night, and a parking garage and a Vermont farmhouse and a kitchen floor at 3 in the morning, and Ruth Calloway's 10-year-old Volvo and Warren Duffield in his car in a private lot, and Beverly handing me a card with a name on it. All of it, every piece of it, it brought me here. She picked James up. He was heavy, in the way toddlers are heavy. Solid, convinced of their own weight. He wrapped his arms around her neck with the total commitment of someone who does not yet know how to hold back. She held him at the window. He said "buh" at a pigeon on the ledge across the alley. She laughed, genuinely, all the way through. The kind of laugh that had nothing in it but the moment. She had not laughed like that in a very long time. She finally understood what Sandra Fielding had offered her. The prison door had been unlocked all along. Not by Garrett, who did not hold the key. Not by Ruth, who had helped her navigate toward it. By herself. Her own hands. She had been her own warden. She had stayed long past when the structure made sense, because she had not let herself see that she could leave. The skills she had given his life were hers. The precision. The patience. The ability to read a room. They were going home with her. Not anymore, not one more day. Breathing room mid-chapter 14, she ordered lunch. Corinne came for an hour, and they sat on the floor of the empty office and ate from containers with plastic forks and talked about the first project, the community center 3 blocks north, the one that had been operating from a basement for 11 years and had just received the grant to build above ground for the first time. Corinne had ideas. Good ones. She had the specific quality of someone who thought in 3 dimensions and had been waiting for a context where that was valued. They talked until the food was gone. James fell asleep on the blanket Cassandra had brought in the bag. She covered him with her jacket. She and Corinne kept working, quieter now, not to wake him. The afternoon light came through the corner window. It moved slowly across the floor as the hours passed. Changed angle. Changed color. Still right, still exactly right. She worked until the light in the corner window told her it was time to go. She packed up. She buckled James back in his stroller. He had not woken once. He trusted the room. He trusted her. She locked up and went home. It was April. James was 16 months old. He had mastered walking to the degree that he was now experimenting with running, which was the walking but faster and with less stability. And he found this excellent, and she found it terrifying, and they were in agreement that it was the right direction. He said mama and ba and da and tree and book and mo, which was more, applied universally. More banana, more walk, more book, more everything. He wanted more of everything. She found this the most accurate possible orientation to life. The community center project had been formally approved. Whitmore Design and Architecture had submitted the preliminary design to the organization's board 3 weeks ago. The board had unanimously approved it. There had been a long silence in the room after she presented, and then one of the board members, a woman in her 60s named Dolores, who had been running this organization for 20 years, said, "This is exactly what we have been trying to describe to architects for years. This is it." She had driven home from that meeting and sat in her car outside her Brooklyn apartment building for 3 minutes. Not out of inability to go in, out of needing a moment to let the specific quality of that feeling exist in a quiet space. She had let it. The office was starting to look like itself. Corinne had found a very large table at an estate sale, solid oak, the kind of table that had worked hard for decades and still had decades left in it. They had carried it up the stairs themselves. It fit the space exactly. Cassandra had not measured it beforehand, she had just known. Diane was back in Vermont. She had gone back at the beginning of the month with the promise to return in June. She had also begun a video call schedule with James that was, by current count, 3 times a week and lasted as long as James' attention span, which on good days was 10 minutes and on banana days was less. Frank Whitmore had driven to Brooklyn twice to see the office. He had walked around it in the way he walked around things he was impressed by and was not going to say he was impressed by. He had run his hand along the oak table. He had stood at the corner window for a long time. He had said finally, "Good light." Just that. Coming from Frank Whitmore, a man who expressed approval through understatement the way some people express it through speeches, this was everything. Ruth had called last week to confirm that all final documents had been filed and acknowledged. The divorce was complete. The trust was funded. The name change was official. She was Cassandra Whitmore in every legal sense. She was Cassandra Whitmore. She said it in her head sometimes. Not often. Just enough. To hear it land. She took James to the office on a Tuesday morning. Early. Before Corinne arrived. She wanted the space for a few minutes first. She unlocked the door. The morning light was coming in through the corner window. She had been in this space enough times at enough hours to know exactly how it moved. She had designed it to move this way. She had seen it in the space before she built anything. She had stood in the empty room and understood what it could become, and she had been right. She had been right the way she was right about the school in Brooklyn and the apartment on the west side that a young couple was living in now and had told her 3 years ago was the best space they had ever inhabited. She was right about rooms. She had always been right about rooms. She set James down. He walked immediately to the oak table and put both hands on it and looked up at her. "Yes," she said. "Table." "Tuh," he said. "Close enough," she said. He walked to the corner window. Both palms on the glass. His preferred position. She thought he was going to grow up to be an architect, and she was going to let him come to that conclusion himself in his own time, and in the meantime she was going to let him touch every surface he reached. She sat on the floor against the far wall. She watched the light move. She thought, 1 year ago I was in a Vermont farmhouse watching snow and trying to understand what I had done and what I was going to do next. I had a savings account with $41,000 and a baby and 2 hard drives and a card with a lawyer's name on it. I did not know if any of it was enough. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was exactly enough. She thought about Beverly. Beverly was still at Mercy General. She had sent a card when Cassandra reached out to thank her. The card said, "I am so glad. I always knew." 3 sentences. Then her name. She was getting a good wine sent to her office. It was not nearly sufficient. Nothing was nearly sufficient for what Beverly had done in a hospital hallway with 1 small card and 3 steady sentences. She thought about Ruth. Ruth had started a new case last month that she had mentioned in passing, a case that sounded as large and complex as Cassandra's. She was glad Ruth existed in the world. She was glad women like Ruth existed, who spent 30 years taking the exact thing a man thought would bury you and turning it into the structure of your freedom. She thought about Serena. She had heard, through the kind of information that moves through professional networks without anyone intending to carry it, that Serena had left Harlow Global entirely, had taken a position with a different firm in a different city. She did not know more than that. She did not need to know more than that. She hoped it was a good city. She hoped Serena was building something of her own now. She had enough understanding of what it felt like to be used skillfully by someone charismatic that she felt, for Serena, something that was not quite warmth but was not unkindness. She thought about Warren. She thought about the phone call in 2 cars in 2 different states and the specific quality of relief she had heard underneath his measured voice. and his daughter Claire in San Francisco, who called twice a week and had accurate opinions about men and institutions. She hoped Claire knew that her father had eventually been one of the accurate ones. James was at the corner window making a sound at something on the street below, the particular sound he made when something interested him. She got up. She went to the window. She stood beside him. She looked out at the Brooklyn Tuesday morning. The coffee cart on the corner was open. Someone was getting a very large coffee and having a very specific conversation on their phone and walking in 3 directions simultaneously. 2 dogs tied to a lamppost were investigating each other with the extreme formality of new acquaintances. A child went past on a scooter, very fast, supervised by someone who was jogging to keep up and not entirely succeeding. James said "Bud" a pigeon. She said "Bird." Yes, he said "Bud" again, more firmly, in case she had not understood the first time. She had. She understood completely. She thought, this is what I had this. The ability to stand at a window and see what was actually there. To know a room. To know a space. To know what a thing was and what it could become and trust that knowledge absolutely. I had it before I met him, and I had it in every room I walked through in his world, and I never let it speak about my own life. And now I am standing at a corner window in Brooklyn in April, with my son watching a pigeon, and I am using it for exactly what it was always meant for. Building something. Mine. She thought about the morning of her wedding, the dress she had designed herself, the small ceremony they had both wanted, the absolute certainty she had felt in the morning of that day. She did not regret the certainty. It had been real. The certainty had been real even if the man was not fully real, even if the version of him she married was a version that contracted over years into something smaller and more controlling and less interested in her. She had loved what was real and grieved what was false. And she was done grieving. She was building. Not rebuilding. Building. For the first time with no one else's specifications. She opened her laptop. She set it on the corner of the oak table. She opened the community center file. She had a meeting with Dolores in 2 hours, and there were 3 things she wanted to refine before then. She put in her earbuds. She started working. The light moved through the corner window. It moved slowly, the way light moves in the morning when the angle is low and specific. Across the floor. Across the table. She worked in it without trying to stop it. You could not stop light from moving. You could only design the room so that wherever it was exactly right. James, at the window, had moved on from the pigeon and was now deeply invested in something happening on the sidewalk below. He kept saying "Ma," more. She could hear him from across the room. There was always more. That was the thing about windows. There was always something new outside them. She worked for an hour. Corinne arrived and they talked about the structural amendments to the community center design and agreed on 3 changes and disagreed productively about a 4th and settled it without drama because productive disagreement was part of how good design happened. James made his opinions about the disagreement known through a series of sounds, and Corinne said, "Very seriously, I think he has a point," and they both laughed. She thought about the press conference. Garrett at the lectern. She had not watched it live. She had been on the floor of this office with James and Corinne and containers of food, and she had not watched it live, and it had happened anyway. Things that were true happened whether or not you watched them. She had spent enough of her life watching things happen to someone else's timetable. She had other things to do. She thought, whatever he does next with his company and his life and his version of these events, whatever he says to people at dinner parties, whatever shape he gives this story in his own telling, it does not change what is in the legal record. It does not change what is in James's trust. It does not change the name on the door of this office, which is her name, which she chose. It does not change any of it. She thought about Eleanor's card. "I hope you are building something beautiful." She would send Eleanor a photograph when the community center was finished. It would be a long time from now, but she would send it. Eleanor Harlow deserved to see what her apology, late and careful as it was, had been part of building. Outside the corner window, Brooklyn was being what it was. Alive, specific. Loud when it wanted to be, quiet on side streets. The kind of city that had been here longer than anyone in it, and would be here after all of them, and did not require your participation to continue but got better with it. James left the window. He walked across the floor in his walking way, his determined gait, toward her at the table. He pulled at her pant leg. She looked down. He was looking up at her with the complete focus of a person who has decided you are the most interesting thing currently available. "Hi," she said. He said, "Mama." "Yes, that is exactly right." She picked him up. He put his arm around her neck. She held him at the window, at the corner, in the light. She breathed. She had not been breathing, she realized. Not fully. Not in years. There had always been something slightly held in her chest, something slightly braced, some low continuous awareness of the next thing that needed managing, the next adjustment, the next way of being smaller or quieter or more convenient. It was gone. She breathed, all the way in, all the way out. She looked at the street below. She looked at the morning light on the buildings across the way. She looked at her son, who was looking at a pigeon on the ledge of the building across the alley with the absolute focused wonder of someone encountering a pigeon for only the 16th time in his life. She thought, whatever comes next. She let the thought sit. She did not add to it. She did not qualify it. She did not plan around it or brace against it or try to predict the shape of it. She just let it be what it was, a door open. She had built the door. She was ready.